Stop arguing with the narcissist in your head. Try this. Sometimes our strongest instincts about how to heal from narcissistic abuse can lead us astray. If you were accused of being the source of all of your family's problems, then you may have been a scapegoat. These messages are often sent by a narcissistic parent who's trying to offload their own feelings of worthlessness onto the scapegoat child. As a kid in need of a parent, there was really no choice but to find a way to accept responsibility for the parent's accusations. Kids play the role of scapegoat by unconsciously concluding two painful things about themselves. First, that there's something wrong with who they are. This conclusion makes it seem reasonable that their parent is being so critical of them. And once this belief is in place, the parent is not being abusive or cruel, they're just reacting to how the child supposedly is. Second, the child concludes that they just deserve less than other people. Now their parent's lack of care towards them is not willful neglect, it's just that the kid doesn't deserve anything more than that. If you're watching this video, then you may have realized that these conclusions applied and were false. Seeing through the delusions in your narcissistic family is an essential first step towards healing from it all. It can whet the appetite for more and more information too. The scapegoat survivor's hope may be that by learning more and understanding more about what they were put through, that they can then undo the lessons learned. And I think this is a pretty reasonable hope, yet I want to explain today how it may keep you stuck. In today's video, I'm going to explain why trying to undo your narcissistic parents' messages to you may only make them stronger. There's real psychological research that explains this unintended consequence. And I encourage you to watch until the end because I'm going to offer you a way to lessen the power that the past can have over you in this respect. Well, my name is Reid, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in helping scapegoat survivors recover from narcissistic abuse. In my professional and personal experience, I've worked to identify the fundamentals to this process of recovery, and this has led me to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1 is making sense of what happened so that you know it wasn't your fault. Pillar number 2 is gaining distance from narcissistic abusers today and closeness to safe people. And pillar number 3 is to live in defiance of the narcissist rules. I think it's also essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, validate, and support you on this path. I've both seen and experienced large improvements in quality of life after applying these pillars. And today's video falls under pillar number 1, making sense of what happened. And as I just mentioned, if you were the scapegoat child to narcissistic parents, then you may have had to believe that, again, there was something wrong with you or that you deserve less than others just to stay in relationship to them. As an adult now, though, you can work on freeing yourself from such beliefs. Towards that end, I've created a free webinar called How to Defy the Narcissist's 2 Biggest Rules. And these 2 biggest rules are to think of yourself as defective and undeserving. So in this webinar, you'll learn how to chart your course towards freedom from these 2 once needed beliefs while learning and cultivating an attitude to accept whatever comes your way as you do this. When our instincts to heal keep us stuck, scapegoat survivors seek freedom from the abusive messages received from their narcissistic parent. A common way they may go about doing this is by revisiting memories of the ways they were treated. The hope may be that they can realize their parents' messages were not true like they seemed at the time, and that they may finally feel adequate and deserving as a result. Kind of that there'll be a catharsis of sorts, a release from all this sort of pent-up self-abuse that's had to take the place of the parents' abuse. This strategy certainly has the scapegoat survivor's best interest in mind. Yet here's what often happens with it. Instead of finding and feeling liberation from the parent's cruelty and contempt, the scapegoat survivor gets sucked further into the past. Instead of feeling that cathartic realization that they never were defective or undeserving in the first place, they feel like nothing has really changed. And then they may double down by going even further into these memories. Maybe they just haven't thought deeply enough about how wrong their parent was about them. Or maybe they need to look more closely at particularly painful instances of their abusive past. Well, let's look at how this played out in the life of an anonymized client named Frank. He was 25 years old and felt like he was doing everything he was supposed to do, yet his life just didn't work. He worked hard at his job and performed well. He played in a band and would always show up for practices. And he had a decent-sized group of friends that he would meet on the weekend, usually at bars. He didn't have a close romantic relationship, but he wasn't aware of missing out on anything in that regard. Frank was a driven guy. Whatever he set his mind to, he worked very hard to achieve. Despite doing this across his life, he knew that when it was time to go to sleep every night, he just wasn't fulfilled. Everything felt like it came with a deadline in his life. And sure, he was meeting them, but this didn't afford much meaning to him. So this dawning realization led Frank to seek therapy. He didn't know what to look for, but found someone who worked with anxiety and trauma. In the first few sessions, this therapist asked Frank to describe what it was like growing up. For the first time in Frank's life, he started talking about how many eggshells he had to walk on around his father. This man always had to be and seem superior to Frank. He would routinely berate Frank's efforts and was suspicious of Frank's achievements in school and music. His therapist remarked that his father's need to put Frank down and his lack of concern for how that made Frank feel sounded pathologically narcissistic. Well, that night, Frank went home and did some online research about this concept, a new concept to him, of narcissism. And he was blown away at how accurately these articles and videos described his father. He felt like he could now see over a wall in his mind that he had forced himself not to look over for so many years, and he wanted more of this. He was determined to unlearn the harsh, abusive lessons his father had forced upon him. Maybe then he could feel more fulfilled. So over the next few months, Frank prioritized reading and watching videos about narcissism over everything else in his life, and that included seeing his friends or playing in his band. He reasoned to himself that he needed to unearth all the bad programming his father did to him before he could really enjoy his life. This priority led Frank to become more and more isolated and less involved in his current life. And this certainly wasn't his intention, but it was where he found himself nonetheless. Science explains why these instincts don't work. There was a psychology professor named Daniel Wegner who discovered in a series of lab experiments that trying to modify our thoughts actually only makes them occur more often and more intensely. He asked half of his subjects in his experiments not to think of a white bear. The way he proved this was really a cool and I think elegant study, where he asked half of his subjects in the experiment not to think of a white bear and the other half to think of it. He then recorded what they thought of after that instruction. The group instructed not to think of a white bear turned out to think the most about it. Wegner shone a light then on how our thinking processes don't work the same way that things do in the physical world. If there's something, say, bothering us in the physical world, then we can take action to subtract it from our environment. So let's say we're outside on a warm summer night enjoying time around the fire with some friends. All's well and good until mosquitoes show up to the party and start biting everyone. Well, we can do something about this. Maybe you set up a bug light to attract the mosquitoes to it and kill them. Or maybe you apply insect repellent, like off, on your skin to keep them away. Whatever the tactic, there's something you can do and it will effectively subtract the noxious element from your environment. Well, subtraction isn't possible when it comes to our thoughts. When we have a thought, say about a time when we felt defective and undeserving in childhood, the attempt to subtract this experience from our thinking doesn't work. As Daniel Wegner showed in his experiments, thoughts work through addition only. We have one thought and all subsequent thoughts add to it. They never subtract the initial thought. In fact, Wegner showed how the attempt to subtract a thought only results in adding more and more related thoughts to it. So we get the opposite of what we hoped. Although Wegner focused on thought suppression, his findings have implications for the topic today. When scapegoat survivors try to re-engineer their past to subtract the conclusions that they are defective and undeserving, they're actually being put back in touch with the messages that led to these conclusions in the first place. Trying to subtract their parents' claims about them only leads to those claims coming up more often and more intensely. And let's look at how this was illustrated again with Frank. He was trying to subtract the lessons learned from his narcissistic father by going over all the abusive episodes he had endured. He wanted to revamp these memories to have more compassion towards himself and anger towards his father, and yet neither would seem to come. What does work to free yourself from feeling defective and undeserving today? Trying to control our thoughts about the past only heightens their presence. The solution then is to surrender the effort to control them. But what can you do instead? Two things. First, you can cultivate a mindful or accepting stance towards whatever thoughts come up. In this way, you are no longer at odds with your thoughts. Whichever ones come up are what come up. And of course, this is easier said than done and is always a work in progress. We're conditioned to identify ourselves with the content of our thoughts. So surrendering control over what we think can feel like losing our grip on who we are. And of course, that can feel extremely scary. The good news, though, is that those fears will not get realized. We can all survive continuing to exist with less attachment to what we think. It may not just seem so at first. And accepting your thoughts is never a job that's completed. We're invited in every new moment to keep doing it. And I just want to emphasize that the free webinar about how to defy the narcissist's 2 biggest rules goes right to the heart of this first thing that you can do of teaching how to cultivate this attitude of acceptance of whatever comes up. So if this is making some sense to you, I really encourage you to check that out. The second thing you can do is to reorient yourself to your life today and the people in it. You might be asking, how can that possibly work? Isn't that like silencing myself and saying that whatever they did to me is okay? Well, it can certainly seem so, but here's why it's not. When you notice and interrupt your attention to thoughts that revolve around your narcissistic parent, something powerful happens. You're no longer in the trance of that parent. You're symbolically stating that your life apart from them matters, and you're countering the earlier experience that what is uniquely important to you holds no value to others. So those initial objections were based on the claim that this approach amounts to abandoning yourself. But to the contrary, reorienting away from the narcissistic parent and towards your life today is actually coming back to yourself. It's an exercise in the opposite of abandonment. It's in fact, I think, a needed reunion. Learning to notice, interrupt, and redirect what you orient to takes practice. And this is one of the central elements of my new live online group class called Breaking the Scapegoat Spell. And in this class, we focus on helping survivors stop getting pulled back into the old battles with their narcissistic parent in their minds in a psychological way. Instead of spending endless energy trying to disprove what the narcissistic parent said, you'll learn concrete skills for redirecting your attention toward your present day life. And each week you'll be guided through practices that strengthen your ability to step out of your parent's mental grip and to reinvest in your own priorities, relationships, and sense of yourself today. You'll also work alongside others who know what it's like to carry these burdens, which makes the process a lot less lonely and feel more empowering. So overall, the class will give you tools to interrupt the looping cycle of proving the narcissist wrong, support to safely redirect attention towards what matters to you now, and partner-based exercises so you can experience in real time how to shift focus away from your parents' messages. And you can find the link to the course in the description box below or by clicking here. Well, let's return to Frank. He and his therapist continued working together, and this had become Frank's main social outlet. Each session, Frank would come in with a new insight he had discovered while working through his memories. His therapist saw how Frank was withdrawing from his life in favor of trying to subtract the lessons from his past. He wondered if this reflected Frank's very earnest and well-meaning effort to help himself, getting thwarted by the way the human mind can work at times. The more Frank thought about his father, the bigger presence the man was having in Frank's life today. So his therapist offered as much to Frank in the next session. He told him that as important as his efforts to heal by rewriting his past narrative were, that the effort was having the unintended but very real effect of tangling him up even more with his father. Frank felt somewhat criticized by his therapist's statement and said so. And his therapist validated and related to how Frank would feel this way. After this, Frank too said he was concerned that his life was getting too narrow. They then worked to reorient Frank back to his current life aims and address what interfered with him enjoying these pursuits today. Frank's efforts to free himself from the devaluation, deprivation, and domineering that his father had put him through were unintentionally tying him even closer to his father. His experience illustrates how important it can be for scapegoat survivors to reorient to their lives today to break the bond to a narcissistically abusive parent. Well, I want to thank you for tuning in today and for your continued support of this channel. And I look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.